Hello, brethren. It's good to be with you again. We continue this Sunday in our study of the overview of the Old Testament. Again, the Bible being the owner's manual that God has given to us, it is important for us to know its content, know how to use it, where to find the things that we're looking for. And so we've been going through the different sections, specifically of the Old Testament, talking about the 5-5-12 division of the 39 books of the Old Testament. There are 5 books of the law, the books of Moses, the Torah, the Pentateuch. There are the 12 books of history from Joshua all the way through Esther. And even though that's all chronological, Esther, you remember, kind of fits in between Ezra chapter 6 and 7. Then you have the 5 books of wisdom, where we're at right now. 5 books of wisdom being Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. We've done Job, we've done Psalms, and today we're going to do the book of Proverbs, an overview. So to begin, the book of Proverbs was written by King Solomon. And the reason I know that is if I look at Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 1, it says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel." Now, it would make sense that Proverbs would be written by Solomon, as he was the wisest man to have ever lived. Notice I say man. I didn't say God in man or God as man. But we notice some things about Solomon that are curious. He is the wisest man. He was bestowed with godly wisdom. And yet we know from our reading in 1 Kings that he failed in his dedication and devotion to God. And because of his great sin of worshiping other gods, the nation of Israel was divided. The United Kingdom became the divided kingdom because of his sin. And God tore the 10 tribes of the kingdom from his son Rehoboam. So how can the wisest man in the world forget God, whom he prayed to, asking for that wisdom, and who gave him that wisdom? Maybe another way to put it, Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we read of a sad individual who's trying to find satisfaction and fulfillment in life without God. And then he finally comes to the conclusion at the end of that book that, well, here's the sum of all knowledge. Fear God and keep his commandments, for that is man's everything. Why would a man who was so smart and knew so much have to go through what he went through to figure that out? Well, I think the answer has to do with there's wisdom and then there's wisdom. Let's investigate this a little bit, okay? Turn to 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 3 through 9. Make that 9 through 12. 1 Kings 3, 9 through 12. Therefore, this is Solomon's prayer to God. God has come to him and says, "What can I do for you? I'm very pleased with you. What would you like?" And Solomon's response was, "Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart," notice, "to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours?" Solomon was asked, "What do you want?" by God. And Solomon said, "I want to be able to rule your people well, to be the judge that they need." Verse 10, "And the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. Then God said to him, because you have asked this thing, and have not asked long life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Behold, I have done according to your word. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. He's going to be the wisest. But let's just keep considering. Look at verse 28 of that same chapter. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him, underline it, to administer justice. Chapter 4, verses 29 through 34. And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding, and largeness of heart, like the sand on the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the men of the East, and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahal. And his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs. We have the book of Proverbs. And his songs were 1,005. We talked about the fact that some of the psalms that we have are written by Solomon. And also he spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon, even to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals, of birds, of creeping things, and of fish. And men of all nations, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And finally, turn over to 2 Chronicles chapter 9. 2 Chronicles chapter 9, verses 26 and 27. So Solomon reigned over all the kings, from the river, that is the Euphrates, to the land of the Philistines, which is to the west, and as far as the border of Egypt, probably down to Sinai. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedar trees as abundant as the sycamores which are in the lowland. You put it all together, and what we see, added to what we read of Solomon's failings, it would seem that the wisdom that God gave him was a worldly wisdom. How to judge and discern things in this world. Thus, he was able to make the nation of Israel prosperous because he was wise with regards to things under the sun. He was able to give judgment between what is right and what is wrong according to statutes and laws because he had that wisdom. It doesn't necessarily translate to spiritual wisdom. And that kind of follows because God gives us a choice. And if he made Solomon so wise he couldn't fall, he would have taken away Solomon's choice. And we see this even with his fallings. Look at 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 1. This is before God comes to Solomon to ask him what he wants. Notice, now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he married Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall all around Jerusalem. It's against the law of Moses for the children of Israel to marry Gentiles. And yet, his first wife, should be his only wife, but his first wife, is the daughter of Pharaoh. Why? Well, he made a treaty with Pharaoh. Why? So that you don't have conflict. And doesn't that make sense with one of the most powerful empires that's right there, you border up against her? Doesn't it make sense? Under the sun, according to worldly wisdom, doesn't it make sense to marry yourself so that there's no problems between the two kingdoms? Yes, that's worldly wisdom, but not spiritual. And then turn over to 1 Kings 11, verses 1 through 8. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, "You shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love, and he had several hundred wives, 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. And we read that he eventually built sites of worship to them. Again, this speaks of worldly wisdom. The more wives you have from other nations that are princesses, you are becoming allies with those nations and securing your country. That's wise under the sun, but it's not wise spiritually. So this great wisdom that Solomon has, we need to understand, doesn't mean he was the greatest theologian in the world. It means that he was wise in the ways of the world, and thus the book of Proverbs. It makes sense that the book of Proverbs would come from such a one, because again, the Proverbs are ways to help us not necessarily be saved, though it's there. A lot of mention of God in those books, but it's about wisdom, and much of the book of Proverbs is just how to live your life successfully here under the sun, as we're going to notice. So, the author, Solomon. The date of this book, well, we know the reign of Solomon was from 970 to 930 BC, roughly. So that's when he would have written those things or said those things. But you remember, he wrote a lot of Proverbs. The collection that we have that is specifically called the Book of Proverbs, inspired, collected by inspiration and preserved by God, that may not have actually come to be until the time of King Hezekiah. Look at Proverbs 25 and verse 1. Proverbs 25 and verse 1. These are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. So it sounds like these following Proverbs, these were ones that in the time of King Hezekiah, that would have been 715 to 686 BC, so, a good couple of hundred years after Solomon's life, that were collected. They were Proverbs of Solomon, but it was some men of King Hezekiah that gathered them together to be used. So when exactly it became in this book as we see it, don't know exactly, but that kind of gives us a hint that these were collected over time and then codified at some time. Well, what are the purpose of Proverbs? We've talked about them a little bit, that they are to help us to live our lives here under the sun successfully. They tend to have to do with earthly things. They have a lot to say about money. They have a lot to say about raising children. They have a lot to say about how to be a friend. They have a lot to say how to keep yourself out of trouble and how to be successful in your life. But we have to understand one thing about Proverbs. Proverbs are generalized truths. Okay? That means they're not true 100% of the time, but in general, they are true. Consider the proverb by Ben Franklin, or attributed to Ben Franklin. Early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. So is that true? Every single human being who goes to bed early and wakes up early, are they healthy, wealthy, and wise? No. Of course not. But it's a proverb, which means in general, if you get to bed at a decent time so that you get some rest, and you start your day early so you can get after it, that's going to be good for you. It's going to be beneficial. That's how Proverbs work. Consider Proverb 22 and verse 6. Train up a child in the way of the Lord, in the way that he should go, and when he's older, he won't depart from it. Is that true 100% of the time? Every single parent that did their best to raise a child up in the admonition of the Lord, do their children remain Christians? Of course not. There's free will. But in general, if a parent does this, the results are going to be good and profitable. That's what Proverbs are. We need to understand that when we use them so that we don't use them as a flail. And what I mean by that is a godly person has a son that goes his way, because he has free will. He tried to train the boy up, but the boy wouldn't take it. We don't turn around and say that that man was a bad parent. Now, he might have been a bad parent, but if the evidence is he wasn't a bad parent, he was trying and he tried working with the boy, there is free will. And we don't use these proverbs to say, see, if you'd have done the right thing, your son would be saved. So we can even do that to ourselves. And that's cruel, and that's not how proverbs are to be used. They are generalized truths that will help us to live. Okay? These are the things we should be about, because in general, if we do these things, our life will profit. If there is one theme in the book of Proverbs, because we're going to come to see that the book of Proverbs in general is a verse by verse, passage by passage consideration of wisdom. It's not a narrative. There's not really a storyline. Even inside individual chapters, it's literally one verse talks about money, the next verse talks about your kids, the next verse talks about it's kind of a list of good advice. And they're scattered all as all aspects of life are trying to be addressed. If there's a common theme running through it, it is this. Turn to Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7. That the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Chapter 1 and verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Do you remember our Hebrew poetry? Right? That would be antithetical, right? Antithetical poetry. We have one who fears the Lord, that's the beginning of wisdom, but in contrast to that, antithetical, the fool, he despises. What was the word? Instruction. Look at chapter 9 and verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Now, see, that's the one, what did we call that? Synthesis. That's one point, and then he says it again in another way, right? We have the fear of the Lord gives you wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One gives you understanding. See, they're similar statements. Chapter 14, verse 27. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, to turn one away from the snares of death. It's another example, right? That's the one that adds to it. The fear of the Lord, to begin with, is good because, I lost my place. It's the fountain of life, and it'll turn you away from the snare of death, which they're kind of related. Chapter 19, verse 23. The fear of the Lord leads to life, and he who has it will abide in satisfaction. He will not be visited with evil. Chapter 31 and verse 30. I have the wrong verse there. It's a wonderful verse, but that's I don't think that's what I was looking for. Oh well, I guess I don't have time for that. I guess I'll take the time since I'm here, right? If anybody finds it for me, go ahead and shout out. I guess 30 was what I was doing. It's just a minor point. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. So again, if there's a theme that runs through it, it is reverence and respect for God. will get you wisdom and understanding and all these good things. And that's the theme that runs through, which makes sense. He's our creator. He put us in this world. He created this world. He knows how best for us to operate in this creation of his. So going to him is the beginning of the right thing. All right? So there's the purpose. Let's talk about the divisions of Proverbs. Again, as I spoke earlier, the book is kind of verse by verse, passage by passage, but there are three distinct sections that we can see. The first is chapters 1 through 9. Chapters 1 through 9 are a series of instructions from Solomon to his son. Excuse me. Look at verse 8 of chapter 1. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother. 10. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. Chapter 2 and verse 1. My son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you. Then it goes on, so that you incline your... Chapter 3. My son, do not forget my law. Chapter 4. Hear, my children, the instruction of a father. Chapter 5. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. 6. My son, if you become surety for your friend. 7. My son, keep my words. 8. Guidance again about, we're going to talk about one of the major themes. But 8 and 9, he's continuing what we read in chapter 7. And there's that constant admonition of, listen, son, pay attention to what I'm saying to you. So 1 through 9, we have this words to a son. Now, whether it's speaking actually to Rehoboam, whether he's speaking to all of his children, or whether he is putting this up as a type, archetypal, this is how fathers should relate to their children, and mothers, parents to their children. Listen to the wisdom of your parents, right? Honor your mother and father, for this is the first command with promise. That's the first section. And in this section, the allegorical tool that Solomon uses is to contrast sin, which is often referred to as the strange woman in the Old King James, the deceitful woman in New King James and in other translations, with wisdom, who is personified, and again allegorically, a woman. Seek her. She's the woman you should pursue, wisdom, not that strange woman, which is sin. And let's consider this. Look at chapter 1, verses 20 through 27. We'll consider wisdom first, in contrast then with the strange woman, which is sin. Chapter 1, verse 20 through 27. Wisdom calls aloud outside. She raises her voice in the open squares. She cries out in the chief concourses. At the openings of the gates in the city, she speaks her words. How long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? For scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Turn at my rebuke. Surely I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called you, and you refused, I have stretched out my hand, and no one regarded. Because you disdained all my counsel, and would have none of my rebuke, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your terror comes. When your terror comes like a storm, and your destruction comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish comes upon you. So wisdom as a woman cries out and says, here I am, I'm crying out in the public square, come to me. Because if you don't, it's going to be bad times for you, and you will be scorned for that. Chapter 3, 13 through 18. Happy is the man who finds wisdom, and the man who gains understanding. For her proceeds, her, again, wisdom, are better than the profits of silver, and her gain than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things you may desire cannot compare with her. Length of days is in her right hand, and in her left hand riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who retain her. Chapter 4, 5 through 13. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget, nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will preserve you. Love her, and she will keep you. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and in all things your understanding and in all your getting, get understanding. Exalt her, and she will promote you. She will bring you honor when you embrace her. She will place on your head an ornament of grace. A crown of glory she will deliver to you. Hear, my son, and receive my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. I have taught you in the ways of wisdom. I have led you in right paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered, and when you run, you will not stumble. Take firm hold of instruction, and do not let go. Keep her, for she is your life. Wisdom. Chapter 8, 1 through 11. Does not wisdom cry out, and understanding lift up her voice? She takes her stand on the top of the high hill, beside the way where the paths meet. She cries out by the gates at the center of the city, at the entrance of the doors. To you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. O you simple ones, understand prudence, and you fools, be of an understanding heart. Listen, for I will speak of excellent things, and from the opening of my lips will come right things. For my mouth will speak truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are with righteousness. Nothing crooked or perverse is in them. They are all plain to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. Receive my instruction, and not silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold, for wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things one may desire cannot be compared with her. Contrast that. One more section. Chapter 9, 1 through 6. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her meat. She has mixed her wine. That means she cuts her grape juice with water to make sure that there is no intoxication. She has sent out her maidens. She has also furnished her table. She has sent out her maidens. She cries out from the highest places of the city. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And for him who lacks understanding, she says to him, Come, eat of my bread, and drink of the wine I have mixed. Forsake foolishness and live, and go in the way of the Lord. It's interesting. Compare what you read there in 4 and 5 to the whole Isaiah 55. Ho, come, all who would come. Come eat meat without having to pay. Come drink without having to pay. The invitation of the Lord, very similar to the invitation of wisdom. Why? Because the fear of the Lord, the seeking of the Lord, is the seeking of wisdom. Contrast that to what we read about the strange woman. Chapter 1, 10 through 19. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, Come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, the grave, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Here he just talks about sin, but later he's going to make that allegory. Turn to chapter 5, 1 through 14. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Lend your ear to my understanding, that you may preserve discretion, and your lips may keep knowledge, for the lips of an immoral woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lay hold of hell, lest you ponder her path of life. Her ways are unstable. You do not know them. Therefore hear me now, children, my children, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Remove your way far from her, and don't go near the door of her house, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the cruel one. Here he starts using that allegory of the strange, or what did the New King James say, the immoral woman. Verses 20 through 23 of that same chapter. For why should you, my son, be enraptured by an immoral woman, and be embraced in the arms of a seductress? For the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. His own iniquities entrap the wicked man, and he is caught in the cords of his sin. He shall die for lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray. Chapter 6, beginning in verse 23. For the commandment is a lamp, and the law a light. Reproofs of instruction are the way of life, to keep you from the evil woman, from the flattering tongue of a seductress. And he just goes on and on to explain again, to contrast. Don't follow her. She's going to lead you to destruction. Finally, chapter 9, 13 through 18. A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple and knows nothing, for she sits at the door of her house, on a seat by the high places of the city, to call to those who pass by, right? Sin is calling out in the center of the city, just like wisdom is calling out from the center of the city. Wisdom calling people to righteousness, sin, the foolish woman, the strange woman, to sin. Notice verse 18. But the man who goes to her, he does not know that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of hell. So the first section is filled with that contrast back and forth. The advice of a father, of a parent, to a son, to a child. Seek wisdom and righteousness, not sin and destruction. The second section are chapters 10 through 29. And they are truly a standalone, verse-by-verse, passage-by-passage study. It does jump off in verse 1 of chapter 10, the Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the grief of his mother. And then it goes verse by verse, sometimes a couple of verses together talking about the same topic. But in general, they are to be read either one verse alone, or if they are put together, two verses, and then you stop reading it and you contemplate it and you think about it. That's what they're supposed to do. You're not supposed to just kind of read it like a book, because if you do, your eyes are going to cross and it's going to just start all sounding the same, because there's a lot of similar admonition. And in this section, there are so many themes that run through them. We'll just look at two that are really interesting. The first one, they're interesting to me, and I'm teaching, so I guess they're interesting to you for now. There's a lot of talk on money in the Proverbs, a lot. Most especially about being surety for somebody, and we would say co-signing on a loan with somebody. And what does it say? Look at chapter 6 of Proverbs, verses 1 through 5. My son, if you become surety, a cosigner, for your friend, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth. You are taken by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, and deliver yourself. For you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself. Plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. He says, if you've made that mistake and co-signed for a friend or a stranger, do whatever you can right now to get out of that. Why? Because what if your friend false? defaults on what you've co-signed, then it's your responsibility. You're not only going to lose money, but there's a good chance you're going to lose your friend also. It's going to bring conflict between them. Consider chapter 11 and verse 15. He who is surety for a stranger will suffer, but one who hates being surety is secure. He who likes to co-sign for a stranger is going to suffer, but he who doesn't like to do that, he's going to be blessed. Chapter 17 and verse 18. A man devoid of understanding shakes hands in a pledge, and he becomes surety for his friend. A man devoid of understanding. Don't do this. It sounds like you're being nice. It sounds like you're doing a good thing. But what you're really doing is causing potential loss of your finances and the loss of your friendship or contention between two people. That's what you're stirring up in doing this. Chapter 22, 26 and 27. Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, one of those who is surety for debts. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you? And there's the thought of, if you don't have the money just to throw away, then don't give it in pledge or co-sign. And there was a great class at Carnes that we had where we studied these things. And one of the things, when you study this topics especially, it even says between parents and children, don't give loans to one another. Don't sign for loans for one another. If you can't give the money to them as a gift, then don't loan it to them. And the reason is, if I give a gift to one of my children, I say, here, I'll loan you this money. What happens if they don't pay me back? There's division between us. Whereas if I give them a gift, give them the money as the gift, and they want to pay me back, well, hallelujah. But if they don't want to pay me back, it was a gift. See the difference? Now there's no trouble. So much on money. Also so much on parenting. We're probably most familiar with 22 and verse 6, right? Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Well, consider these in order. Chapter 13, verse 24. He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. Chapter 19 and verse 18. Chasten your son while there is hope. Do not set your heart on his destruction. Chapter 22 and 15. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. Chapter 3 and 13. Do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. Chapter 29 and 15. The rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. So what's the Bible saying? Just beat on your kids. Of course not. Corporal punishment, spankings, I can't think of the word right now. He calls it a rod, but we would call it go fetch a what? That's what happens when you get old. Switch. Go get a switch. A switching. They are not given to hurt. They are not given to injure. They are given to get attention, especially with young children. You can say no to a child all you want, but when you give them a little on the hand, now you have their attention. Okay? Again, not to give physical harm, but to get their attention. It's the same reason we raise our voice, to get our attention. Son. Why? I now have your attention, and now you will take instruction. That's the purpose of it. And the point of all of this is If you do not teach your children to respect and obey you, what chances are there they're going to respect and obey the civil authority who doesn't love them like you do? And one chance are they going to respect and obey God whom they cannot see? That's why he says, destroy your son if you don't want to use the rod. Use the rod and deliver them from hell. Again, generalizations. So much in the book of Proverbs. Finally, the third section. So, first section is chapters 1 through 9, a son or a father to a son. The second section, chapters 10 through 29, generalized proverbs dealing with all manners of issues that we come across in this physical world. The third section is comprised of the last two chapters. Let's go ahead and turn there. And the only reason I separate them is they may have different authors. They may not. Chapter 30 says, the words of Agur, the son of Jakeh, his utterance. This man declared to Ithiel and Ukal. Okay, so obviously this is from a man named Agur, who's the son of Jacob. Well, I don't know who that is. Well, in the Bible, people are given different names often. We got Simon, we got Peter, we got Cephas, right? We got Saul, who became Paul. This happens a lot. And there are even names that are given to people for special occasions. Do you remember the names? Remember in the story of Ruth that Naomi said, "Don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mari," which means bitter. Okay? Don't call me blessed anymore. Call me bitter, Mari. Kind of a symbolic name. Or how about the children of Isaiah? His first child was Shear-Jashub. And what did that mean? A remnant will return. Well, that's a pretty significant name when you consider the ministry of Isaiah. His second son, which God told him to call him when he went to speak to the kings, was, this is a name that just rolls off the tongue, right? Mahir-Shalai-Hashbaz. You know, just name all your kids that. But what it means is hasten to the spoil. His name was given to him as a special significance to let Judah know you're going to be conquered and you're going to be taken into captivity. Babylonians are hastening to the spoil. How about the children of Hosea? Right? He was told to take a wife of harlotry, and then he had 3 children, and God told them each child the name. The first one, Jezreel. Call your first child Jezreel. What's that? It means God scatters. Oh, well, that doesn't sound good. What's the second child? Laruhamah. What's Laruhamah mean? No mercy. Wow, that doesn't sound good. What's the last child? Lo Ami. Not my people. The time is coming when God is going to scatter Israel across the world. He will not have any mercy. They will not be considered his people anymore. So names are special, and they're given, even pseudonyms are kind of given by certain folks, like that, call me Mari. How about 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 25? Solomon himself was called Jedediah by the Lord, beloved of the Lord. So why do I say all this? Because this collection of the Proverbs of Solomon, does it make sense that the last 2 chapters will be written by other people? I don't think it does. And consider what the words meant. Agur, you know what Agur means? Means gatherer. What does Jacob mean? Means obedience. What does Ithiel mean? It means a devourer. Or excuse me. Ithiel means, because it's got the L, it means one who is with God. And then Ukal, what does Ukal mean? Ukal means to devour, a devourer. So instead of being some man named Agur, the son of Jacob, who declared this to 2 guys that we don't know, a guy we don't know, a son of we don't know, to 2 guys we don't know, could this simply be a proverb from Solomon, who was a man who gathered wisdom obediently to feed the people who are with God? Right? He's the man who gathered. He is Agur. He did it obediently. Jacob, the son of obedience, Jacob. And he gave it to Ithiel. He gave it to the people who are with God, devourer, that they may eat. I think that's what it is. I think it's just a pseudonym for Solomon. But if it's not, it's not. Chapter 31, the words of King Lemuel. Well, the only problem is we have no idea. We don't have any knowledge of any King Lemuel. There certainly wasn't one in Israel. But what does Lemuel mean? Lemuel means belonging to God. So we know that Solomon, when he was a child, was called Jedediah, beloved of the Lord. And now we have the last proverb. All of them are of Solomon, except maybe these last two. And this one's written by King Lemuel, king who belongs to God. I think that's what it is. Those are the three sections of the Proverbs. We have, again, 1 through 9, a father to son. We have 10 through 29, just a long collection of Proverbs. And then 30 and 31. Maybe by others, but I think by Solomon with a pseudonym. What do we do with the Proverbs? Brethren, blessed is the man who meditates on the word of God day and night. These are the perfect nuggets for that. These are like gum that you can take a couple of those verses, you put them in your mouth, and you just ruminate on them the whole day long. Keep them in your mind. They are wisdom from God for us to take in, to understand, so that we can be blessed in our life. That's what we should do. That's the book of Proverbs. Let's conclude by going to our God in prayer. Our kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this day and for the life that you've given us to live. We thank you for this provision that you've given to us, your wisdom, the wisdom that will see us through all things. May we always avail ourselves of it. May we always come to you, fearing you, understanding that you are the source of all good and perfect gifts, wisdom and knowledge accordingly. We love you so much. Please be with us, watch over us, and keep us from the evil one. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We love and miss you all, brethren. Hope to see you soon.